One last song for her dying baby, then a lone hunter stepped through the blizzard. The wind, a razor, tore across the endless white, its howl the only chorus to Ilara's faltering lullaby. Each note was a shard of her soul, offered to the tiny, still form cradled in her threadbare shawls. Liam. Her son. His breath, a ghost against her frozen cheek, was fading with the last light. Snow bit at her exposed skin, crusting her eyelashes, turning her world into a pale, indifferent torment. She had walked until she could walk no more, fleeing whispers that had turned to shouts, then to stones. Now, huddled against the insufficient lee of a fallen pine, the forest vast and pitiless around her, she sang of sunlit meadows they would never see, of a father's gentle hand he would never know, of a love that was the only warmth left in a dying world. The melody, thin and cracked, was a desperate prayer swallowed by the storm's immensity. Far deeper in the woods, where the ancient pines stood like silent sentinels against the blizzard's fury, Cale paused. His snowshoes were silent on the deep drifts, his breath pluming white in the frigid air. A lifetime of solitude had sharpened his senses to an almost preternatural keenness. It wasn't the cry of a beast, nor the groan of tortured timber that had reached him through the gale. It was something else. Fainter than a heartbeat, yet infinitely more human. A song. Or the memory of one. Curiosity, a rare visitor, nudged at the edges of his isolation. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders, his weathered face, framed by a frost-rimed beard, betraying nothing of the internal debate. To turn back to the hard-won warmth of his cabin was instinct. To venture further into the teeth of the blizzard, towards an unknown sound, was folly. Yet, the sound, or the echo of it, pulled at something buried deep beneath layers of grief and self-imposed exile. He moved with the wind, a shadow gliding through a landscape bleached of color and life, his eyes scanning the swirling chaos. Then he saw her. A drift of snow that was too human in its despairing curve. He approached cautiously, his hunting rifle held loosely, ready but unthreatening. She didn't look up, her focus entirely on the bundle in her arms. Her voice, when he finally caught a clear strain of it, was raw with unshed tears and the last vestiges of hope. Cale saw the blue tinge on her lips, the icicles forming in her matted hair. He saw the terrifying stillness of the child. His own past, a landscape as barren as the one before him, flickered behind his eyes, a wife lost to fever, a child who never drew breath. The familiar ache tightened his chest. He could leave her. The wild took what it would. It was the law of this place. But the song, fragile and heartbreaking, held him captive. It was an anthem of defiance against the inevitable. He knelt, the snow crunching softly. Ilara flinched, her eyes, wide and haunted, finally focusing on him. Fear warred with an exhaustion so profound it was almost surrender. He said nothing, merely gestured towards the child with a gloved hand. She clutched Liam tighter, a low, animalistic growl rumbling in her throat. Cale understood. He slowly unslung his pack, pulling out a thick fur pelt. He laid it on the snow, then looked at her, his gaze direct but not unkind. He needs warmth. Cale's voice was rough, like stones grinding together, unused to speech. Shelter. She stared at him, searching for deceit, for the cruelty she had come to expect from the world. She found only a stark weariness that mirrored her own, and something else, a flicker of shared sorrow. With a grunt, Cale made his decision. He carefully, gently, eased the small bundle from her unresisting, frozen fingers. The child was terrifyingly light. He wrapped Liam in the pelt, then, before Ilara could protest or comprehend, he scooped her up as well. She was little more than skin and bone, her head lolling against his shoulder. The journey back was a battle against the storm's renewed fury, each step a testament to Cale's immense strength and grim determination. He shielded them with his body, the wind screaming at his back. When the dim outline of his cabin finally emerged from the swirling white, a plume of smoke a welcome stain against the grey, it was a beacon in a desolate universe. He kicked open the door, and the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs, of solitude and survival, enveloped them. He laid Ilara on his own rough cot by the hearth, then turned his attention to the child, unwrapping the layers, his heart a cold stone in his chest, fearing the worst. The baby was pale, so pale, But as the fire's heat began to penetrate, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the small body. A flicker. Hope, an unwelcome and dangerous guest, dared to breathe in Cale's stoic heart. Ilara, semi-conscious, watched him through slitted eyes, a single tear escaping to trace a path through the grime on her cheek before freezing anew. The hunter, the stranger, was tending her son. And for the first time in an eternity, a sliver of something other than despair pierced through the ice encasing her soul. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of hushed care and watchful silence. Cale's cabin, a compact world of hewn logs and animal hides, became their temporary sanctuary. It was a space built for one, Spartan and fiercely practical, every object holding a purpose, every corner echoing his solitude. Now, a woman's weary sighs and the faint, fluttering breaths of a child disturbed its stark order. Ilara, once she regained some strength, moved like a wraith, her existence solely dedicated to the tiny life she had carried through the storm. She rarely spoke, her voice still lost to the trauma and the blizzard's chill. Instead, she communicated through the fierce intensity of her gaze, the desperate tenderness in her hands as she ministered to Liam. She would sit for hours by the fire, Liam nestled against her, humming fragments of her mournful song, a sound that now wove itself into the fabric of the cabin's silence, a counterpoint to the crackling flames and the wind's distant moan. Cale observed her, his initial pity slowly, almost imperceptibly, transforming. He saw not just a victim of circumstance, but a profound, unyielding resilience. Her hands, chapped and raw, were unfailingly gentle as she coaxed minuscule drops of warmed, watered-down broth between Liam's pale lips, a concoction Cale had gruffly provided, made from a scrawny rabbit he'd snared. He saw the way she conserved every scrap of warmth, tucking the furs around the baby with meticulous precision, her own body a shield against the cabin's inevitable drafts. He continued his own routines, a necessary rhythm against the encroaching wilderness. He'd leave before dawn to check his trap lines, returning with meager offerings, a ptarmigan, more often nothing. He chopped wood, the rhythmic thud of his axe a steady heartbeat in the frozen landscape. But his solitude was different now. It was punctuated by the awareness of their presence, by the faint scent of milk and herbs that clung to Ilara, by the almost silent battle for life being waged beside his hearth. He found himself leaving the choicest pieces of dried meat where she might find them, an extra log by the fire before he left, a water skin filled from the near-frozen creek. She, in turn, ensured the fire never dwindled to embers, its glow a constant, silent thank you. Liam remained perilously fragile. His small chest hitched with every breath, his skin translucent. Yet, he clung to life with a tenacity that mirrored his mother's. Cale, who had long since made peace with loss, found himself watching the child, an unfamiliar tightness in his own chest. He saw not an omen, as her village had proclaimed, but simply a baby, fighting. One evening, the wind howled with a particular vengeance, rattling the cabin's shutters. Liam's breathing grew shallow, a gurgling sound a fresh wave of terror for Ilara. A fever burned through him, his tiny body rigid. Ilara, her face a mask of anguish, tried everything she knew, cool cloths on his forehead, the soft croon of her song, a desperate plea to any god who might listen. She had not slept properly in days, her own reserves depleted. As she swayed with exhaustion, her grip on Liam faltering, Cale moved. He was there suddenly, his large, calloused hand surprisingly sure as he took the baby from her. Ilara gasped, a choked sound, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. Cale didn't speak. He merely sat by the fire, cradling Liam against his broad chest, his presence a solid, unshakable bulwark against the storm within and without. He felt the frail heat of the child, the frantic thrum of a tiny heart against his ribs. He remembered another child, another fever, another helpless night. But this time, he was not alone in his vigil. Ilara sank to the floor beside him, her head resting against his knee, her gaze fixed on her son. They sat like that for hours, two solitary souls bound by a shared fear, a shared hope. As the first grey light of dawn filtered through the cabin's small window, the fever broke. Liam's breathing eased, his small body relaxing in Cale's arms. A profound stillness settled over the room, broken only by Ilara's soft, ragged sobs of relief. Cale gently handed Liam back to her. She cradled him, tears streaming down her face, murmuring his name over and over. Then, she looked up at Cale, her eyes luminous in the dim light. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a mere whisper, fragile as new ice. "They said he was a curse," she breathed, the words tasting of ash. "My village, they drove me out. When his father died before he was born, they blamed me." Blamed him? Cale's expression remained stoic, but his eyes, dark and deep, held a new understanding. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of her pain, her story. "He's just a babe," he said, his voice still rough, but with an undercurrent of something that might have been gentleness. Fighting, Elara clutched Liam closer, a flicker of something akin to trust in her gaze as she looked at the hunter. In the shared silence that followed, a fragile thread of connection, spun from hardship and a child's tenacious grip on life, began to weave itself between them. Weeks bled into a hesitant spring. The blizzards gave way to sleet, then to a reluctant thaw. The iron grip of winter loosened its hold on the land, and with it, a sliver of hope began to bloom in the small cabin. Liam, against all odds, was slowly, painstakingly, improving. The bluish tinge had receded from his lips, replaced by a faint, delicate pink. His cries, though still weak, held a new note of demand rather than sheer distress. Elara's gaunt cheeks had a touch more color, the haunted look in her eyes softened by moments of profound, weary tenderness as she watched her son sleep. Her songs by the fire were less mournful now, sometimes carrying a hint of tentative melody, like a bird testing its voice after a long winter. Cale found himself listening for them, these fragile sounds of life returning. He taught Elara how to prepare certain edible roots he dug from the thawing earth, how to read the subtle signs of changing weather in the wind and clouds. She, in turn, showed him a way to mend his torn furs with a stitch so fine it was almost invisible, a skill learned in a life before her exile. Their shared existence was still largely unspoken, but it was punctuated by these small acts of mutual reliance, a quiet language of survival. One afternoon, as Cale was splitting wood, his senses, always alert, picked up an unfamiliar sound, not the natural cadence of the forest, but the distinct crunch of boots on the damp, thawing ground, approaching from the direction of the lowlands. His hand instinctively went to the axe handle, his body tensing. He signaled silently to Elara, who was inside with Liam. Her eyes widened, but she nodded, quickly and quietly moving Liam away from the single window, her movements practiced and swift. A figure emerged from the tree line, cloaked and hooded, walking with a grim determination. Cale recognized him instantly. Jonas, an elder from Elara's village, the man whose voice had likely been the loudest in condemning her. His face, when he lowered his hood, was stern, etched with the harsh lines of righteousness and unyielding tradition. Jonas's eyes swept over Cale, then flickered towards the cabin, a spark of grim satisfaction in their depths. "Hunter," Jonas's voice was cold, carrying the weight of communal authority. "We knew she sought refuge in these woods. The omens were clear. She carries blight with her." Cale remained still, his silence a wall. Jonas pressed on, his gaze unwavering. "That child, it is unnatural. It survived what no babe should. It is a sign. The spring rains are late, the river low. The village suffers. She must be cleansed." For the good of all, Elara, who had crept to the door, her heart pounding, heard his words. A tremor ran through her. She clutched Liam, whose soft gurgle seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. Cale finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous, like the rumble of distant thunder. "She is under my protection," Jonas scoffed. "Protection? From what? From fate? From the will of the spirits? You harbor a curse, Hunter. It will taint you too. Cast her out. Let the wilderness claim what it should have claimed long ago." Cale's hand tightened on the axe. He could feel Elara's fear radiating from the cabin doorway, a cold wave washing over him. He thought of the tiny, flickering life he had held in his own hands, the fierce love he had witnessed in Elara's eyes. He thought of the village's fear, a fear that bred cruelty, a fear he himself had once known intimately before solitude became his shield. "There is no curse here," Cale stated, his words flat, devoid of emotion but carrying an undeniable finality. Only a mother and her child. Jonas's eyes narrowed. You defy the collective wisdom? For her? A woman outcast, a child marked. He took a step closer, his hand gesturing towards the cabin. She will bring ruin. Send her out, or we will return to retrieve what is ours. To Judge Cale didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply met Jonas's gaze, his own eyes like chips of flint. She stays. The words were quiet, yet they resonated through the clearing with the force of a slammed door. Jonas stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. You will regret this, Hunter. The spirits do not forget. He turned then, his cloak swirling, and disappeared back into the trees, leaving behind a chilling silence, heavy with unspoken threats and the promise of future conflict. Cale slowly let out a breath. He turned to see Elara in the doorway, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and a fierce, nascent defiance. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was not over. The outside world, with its judgments and its fears, had found them. The threat lingered in the air, a shadow lengthening with the spring days. Cale reinforced the cabin door, his movements deliberate, his jaw set. Elara, though visibly shaken by Jonas's visit, found a new steel in her spine. She still cared for Liam with an all-consuming devotion, but now there was a watchfulness about her, an alertness that mirrored Cale's. They spoke little of the confrontation, but it lay between them, an unspoken understanding of the danger that lurked beyond the tree line. Liam, oblivious, continued to thrive, his small victories, a stronger grip, a more focused gaze, the beginnings of a smile, precious beacons of light in their increasingly tense world. Then, one blustery afternoon, when the sky churned with dark, bruised clouds threatening a late, unseasonal storm, they returned. Jonas was not alone this time. 3 other men from the village accompanied him, their faces hard, their hands clutching cudgels and hunting spears. They moved with a grim purpose, their fear having festered into aggression. Cale met them at the edge of the clearing, his axe in hand, Elara a pale but resolute shadow in the cabin doorway behind him, Liam secure in a sling against her chest. We told you, Hunter, Jonas snarled, the wind whipping his cloak around him. She does not belong here. The child is an ill omen. Give them to us. Cale planted his feet, his stance unyielding. I told you, he bit out, his voice a low growl that carried over the rising wind. She stays. He looked past Jonas, at the other men, their eyes filled with a mixture of superstition and malice. This woman, Cale's voice rose, clear and strong, cutting through the wind's howl, has faced death and despair with more courage than any of you have ever known. This child, he gestured towards Elara, breathes because of her spirit, her will. If there is any curse here, it is the blindness in your own hearts, the fear that makes you cruel. His words, raw and impassioned, hung in the air. For a moment, even Jonas seemed taken aback by the fierceness of the solitary hunter. But the moment passed. Fueled by righteous anger and the anonymity of the group, one of the younger men lunged forward with a roar, brandishing his cudgel. The confrontation exploded into violence. Cale moved with a speed that belied his size, his axe a blur, deflecting the blow. The other men surged forward. Simultaneously, the heavens opened. Rain, driven by a furious wind, lashed down, turning the clearing into a muddy, chaotic battleground. Lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening clap of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Liam, startled by the sudden tumult and the bone-jarring thunder, began to wail, a thin, terrified cry. Elara pressed him closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Cale fighting, a desperate, valiant defense against multiple attackers. One of the men broke past Cale, his eyes fixed on her, a snarl twisting his lips. He lunged, reaching for her, full Liam. In that instant, something profound shifted within Elara. The fear remained, cold and sharp, but beneath it, a primal, protective rage ignited. Her song, the one she had hummed to Liam in his darkest hours, the one that had been her lament in the blizzard, rose from her throat, not as a mournful plea, but as a powerful, defiant cry. It was a wild, ululating sound, filled with all her pain, her love, her unyielding will to protect her child. It soared above the storm's fury, a sound so raw, so potent, it seemed to momentarily stun the attackers. The man reaching for her faltered, his eyes widening. Cale, seizing the opening, struck him down with the flat of his axe. The song seemed to infuse Elara with a strange strength. Seeing Cale outnumbered, she grabbed a burning log from the edge of the fire pit near the cabin, its end smoldering despite the rain. With a cry that echoed her song, she thrust it towards another attacker who was closing in on Cale from behind. He recoiled with a yelp, clutching his scorched arm. The battle raged, a desperate struggle against men and the elements. Cale fought with the ferocity of a cornered bear, Elara a tigress protecting her cub. The storm intensified, the wind a shrieking banshee, the rain a blinding torrent. One by one, battered and disoriented by the storm's fury and the unexpected ferocity of their opponents, the villagers faltered. Jonas, seeing his men fall back, his own face contorted with rage and fear, let out a frustrated cry. He knew they were beaten, not just by the hunter, but by something in the woman's spirit, something in the storm itself that seemed to side with the outcasts. He gave a sharp command, and the remaining villagers retreated, disappearing into the raging tempest as quickly as they had come, leaving behind only the churned mud and the echo of their hatred. The storm raged on through the night, a wild symphony of wind and rain, but inside the small cabin, a fragile peace began to settle. Cale, bruised and bleeding from a cut on his temple, tended the fire, its hungry flames licking at the fresh logs, pushing back the chill and the darkness. Elara, her song faded to a soft hum, rocked Liam, who had finally cried himself to sleep, his small face peaceful against her breast. The immediate danger had passed, leaving them exhausted but strangely united. They had faced the darkness together, and together, they had prevailed. As dawn broke, the storm finally exhausted itself. A watery sun peeked through the tattered clouds, casting a pale, hesitant light on a world washed clean. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Cale rose stiffly and went to the door, looking out at the ravaged clearing. The only evidence of the previous night's violence was the trampled mud and a discarded cudgel lying near the tree line. He turned back to look at Elara. She was watching him, her eyes, dark and deep, holding a universe of unspoken emotions. The silence in the cabin was no longer one of mere coexistence, but of shared experience, of a bond forged in fire and fear. Liam stirred, making a small, contented sound. For the first time, Cale noticed the distinct, healthy flush on the baby's cheeks, the steady rhythm of his breathing. A profound sense of relief, so potent it was almost painful, washed over him. He walked over to where Elara sat, kneeling beside her. He reached out, his calloused, blood-stained hand gently touching Liam's soft hair, then moved to cup Elara's cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of soot. Words had always been difficult for Cale, blunt instruments for the complexities of the heart. But in this moment, looking into Elara's eyes, he found the few that mattered. "This is your home now, Elara," he said, his voice raspy but clear, imbued with a sincerity that resonated deep within her. His home, he paused, his gaze unwavering, holding hers. "With me," Elara's breath caught. Tears welled, spilling over, tracing clean paths down her weary face. She leaned into his touch, a silent affirmation. "Cale," she whispered, the first time she had spoken his name with such profound intimacy, such complete acceptance. It was a promise, a prayer, a beginning. A small, hopeful smile touched her lips, mirroring the hesitant sunlight outside. Years passed, marked by the turning of seasons, the steady rhythm of life carved out of the wilderness. The small cabin, once a bastion of solitude, expanded, a new room added, built by Cale's strong hands, softened by Elara's touch. Flowers, bright and resilient, bloomed in a small garden she tended near the doorway, splashes of color against the deep green of the forest. Liam grew from a fragile infant into a sturdy, bright-eyed boy, his laughter echoing through the trees, a sound as natural and joyous as birdsong. He had Cale's quiet strength and Elara's intuitive spirit, a child of the wilderness, nurtured by a love that had weathered the fiercest storms. Cale and Elara moved together with an easy, unspoken understanding, their bond a quiet, powerful undercurrent to their days. His gruffness had softened, replaced by a deep tenderness when he looked at her, at their son. Her songs, once mournful, now carried notes of joy, of peace, lullabies that spoke of hearth and home, of love found in the most unexpected of places. The village, humbled perhaps by years of their own struggles, or by the undeniable evidence of Liam's thriving existence, eventually came to regard the family on the mountain with a mixture of awe and respectful distance. Some whispered that Ilara possessed a gift, that her songs could soothe fevers and calm restless spirits, that Cale's protection was blessed by the ancient powers of the forest. They were no longer outcasts, but legends in their own right, a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. Their life was simple, their love profound, a sanctuary of peace carved from a world that had once sought to destroy them. And in the quiet evenings, as the fire danced in the hearth and Liam slept soundly, Cale would watch Ilara, her face serene in the firelight, and know that he had found not just a home, but his very heart, in the depths of a blizzard, guided by the last strains of a dying song. What if the greatest strength isn't found in avoiding the storm, but in weathering it with an open heart? What if the shelter we seek from the world is not a place, but a connection, forged in the fires of shared vulnerability? The human spirit, like a seed buried under snow, holds an incredible capacity for resilience, for love, for growth, even in the harshest conditions. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more tales of courage, connection, and the enduring power of the human spirit.